Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan with a hot take on, I guess you'd call them the anti-Trump Republicans. Um, there are a lot of Republicans. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. I should say there are a lot of Republican politicians who are hedging their bet toward Biden, and it's an interesting phenomenon because you look at people like you join one party and then why do you move to the other party? I think in the case of Van Drew, who's a congressman near where I live, down in Wildwood, the Jersey Shore, he switched from Democrat to Republican. And I think the reason for that is because the Democratic Party has shifted so far to the left. So that to me makes a certain amount of sense. And that says a lot about Van Drew. I mean, he's sticking to his principles. But you have the likes of John Kasich, who hated Trump in the beginning, but he also ran against Trump during the campaign. And I don't know, in terms of his own ideology, doesn't seem like he's particularly left-leaning. Just seems like he really hates Trump and is kind of mad at him for like not playing the game, which he, I think, had a good chance of winning. And he's also, he played off his image of being a, quote, decent guy. And a lot of hardcore Republicans were backing him over Trump because, he was more dignified and Trump was like, bashing everybody's kneecaps during the debate. But Kasich, even though he's a popular governor, it doesn't mean it translates to a national stage. Bernie Sanders is very popular where he's from, in Vermont. But if you watch any Sticks and Hammered, and he talked about this during the Sanders era pretty extensively, Sanders can't win a national campaign because, Vermont is overrun with ex-hippies and very left-leaning types. A lot of people go up to Vermont and they retire, and it's kind of like a northern version of Florida, I guess. They go to a more rural area, get a cabin, and that's it. They're there, and then they vote according to their beliefs. Another Republican that popped up, and I was kind of surprised at this, Todd Whitman. And Christy Todd was the governor of my state here in New Jersey. And she was okay, I guess. She was a Republican, but she was pretty moderate. But I did have a huge problem with her in that in New Jersey, in South Jersey in particular, there was a stretch of road called Admiral Wilson Boulevard. Now, Admiral Wilson Boulevard, previous to Christy Todd Whitman, was an eyesore that people complained about for years, including the years she was governor. And they said the same thing. You got to clean this up. This is terrible. There are drugs, and there were a ton of prostitutes. I mean, a ton of them. There was these skeevious strip clubs were along that road. There was an infamous hotel called the Oasis Motel that was there since I was in high school. And we made jokes about it around prom time, like, oh, you're going to take your girl to the Oasis, ha ha ha, because it was so disgusting then. They used it in 12 Monkeys, for a seedy motel. I guess they just took an outside shot of it. I don't think Bruce Willis would set foot in that place. But it was just the worst. And so then the Republican National Convention had their day in Philadelphia, or their 4 days, whatever it is. So Christy Todd Whitman knew that people would be staying in Philadelphia, but Philadelphia didn't have enough hotel space for the RNC. Few cities do, really, but so they knew people would come from South Jersey. And what they also did is they actually built temporary lodging. They took warehouses and just turned them into temporary motels for a lot of the RNC people. So because of that Admiral Wilson Boulevard became the likely point at which they would run up and down. And Governor Whitman didn't want people to see that. So she came in and she literally bulldozed every skeezy place along that road. They closed it down and basically forced anybody out of business. Now, to some extent, people were very happy because a lot of those businesses had caused nothing but trouble for years. But they also bulldozed places that weren't particularly trouble. There was a strip club along that road that was, I mean, it's as skeezy as strip clubs get, but it was a very popular strip club. The problem with it was they had giant 20-foot pictures of the strippers on the outside of the building that lit up. You could see them at night from literally a mile away. You could see a giant stripper standing there, not naked, but, you know, scantily clad. And that was right next to a big U-Haul place. And where it didn't look great, both those businesses were operational. You know, it wasn't like some of the other places that they were barely hanging on, mostly because of illegal activity, I think. Whereas these two places were totally legit. But it seems that the state forced them out anyway, just because they didn't look all that great. So I felt that was an overreach of her power. So there's reasons why she's sort of leaning towards the Democrats now, I think. Because much like a Democrat, and you have to sort of be a halfway Democrat anyway to get elected in New Jersey, even as a Republican, you know, it's an overreach of power. And Democrats are kind of famous for that. But the big guest in that arena is Cindy McCain. Now, Cindy McCain is the wife of John McCain, the heiress to the Budweiser fortune, I think. And she's going to show up to the convention tonight to talk about John McCain's friendship with Joe Biden, which is all kinds of weird and all kinds of who cares, really. Because when you look at John McCain, you know, only the most surface level people who don't really look into politics think of John McCain as a real maverick. Like, you have to believe the propaganda that the news media spun about McCain to say, oh yeah, that McCain, he wasn't a regular Republican. He was you know, a rogue. But McCain was an incredible warmonger. Like, he was one of the biggest warmongers ever in Congress. That guy he saw war everywhere and loved it. You know, this was the guy who, when Southern Ossetia got invaded or attacked, it was a whole incident where the Southern Ossetians were attacked by the Georgians, not Georgia, but Georgia near Russia. And then the Russians came in and saved them because, you know, the Southern Ossetia people more identify closer with the Russian Federation people than the Georgians. And McCain was the first one to stand up and say, well, we're all Georgians now. If that guy had been president, we would have went to war with Russia over that. And that would have been a disaster. You know, that John McCain didn't get elected was one of the biggest reliefs of my lifetime, just because he was a ridiculous warmonger. I mean, almost every incident's war. So that Biden is going to show this friendship is bizarre in a lot of ways. But I guess it's their attempt to pick away at the Republican base. But the Republican base is solidly behind Trump. Like, we're talking like this is yet another move by the Democrats to aim their marketing towards the smallest group of people possible. And that small group are the people who hate Trump. There's only about 5% of Republicans that actually hate Trump and don't want to see him be president. That are still holdouts. And a lot of them have defected or weren't really Republicans to begin with, like Bill Kristol amongst them. You know, Bill Kristol is not really a Republican. He's a neocon. He's basically the king of the neocons. And you know, he doesn't really care, I think, what party he votes with, as long as that party is starting a war somewhere, because the neocons are all about war. So it's very interesting that all this is going on in the Democratic Party, a party that once was always accused of being too soft and, you know, being all anti-war and anti-America and all that kind of stuff. The party that, you know, identified slightly more closely with the hippies and, you know, stopping the war, where the Republicans were more militant about it, typically back in the day. And for many years they had been totally militaristic, but those days are done. The Republicans are getting out of that. It's going to be very tough to bring them back towards that. I mean, Pence could get in 2024 and turn the whole boat around, I guess, but people like that these wars are finally coming to an end. They see Trump as a peacemaker, and he's accomplished things, real things. So, yeah, this is another total disaster, Democratic disaster. But what else do you expect from a party that, you know, keeps saying the riots were peaceful?